In the first video, I looked at God's sovereignty and the covenants that he has between the people. I have two main takeaway points. The first is we are being led to a Messiah and a promised land through the lineage covenants. This is really interwoven with temple theology, so I'm going to get into that first. The covenants between God and Abraham, Noah, Moses, and David lead us to Jesus through lineage and land, because ultimately Jesus dwells with the people in the land and later in the people of God, and he is brought to us through the lineage. The promised land reminds us of the Garden of Eden, where God dwelled with us, which then turned into the tabernacle after the fall, and then God dwelled in the temple, and then finally the Word became flesh in Jesus. All of the covenants reveal God's plan just a little bit more. We saw in Abraham, he was given blessings and land. And then later in David, we see that not only will David's lineage bring forth blessings, but that blessing would be a Messiah. Although we don't know at this time that Messiah will ultimately be Jesus. So Adam and Eve were promised that they would crush the serpent's head, which alludes to Jesus. Jesus will crush the serpent's head. Abraham was told that he will have blessings in land. Moses is given the 10 Commandments to show the people how to be more reflective of God's Spirit. There's also a cool lesson there that God will lead them through. God led them out of slavery and saved them in that way. Then there's David. We see that the land from Abraham is actually a blessed land, and that the descendant from Abraham will actually be a Messiah. This all relates strongly to temple theology, where God goes from being present in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve to then dwelling in the tabernacle in Exodus 25 through 40. And then he dwells in the temple, and then he dwells in the heavens, he leaves the temple. And then finally he dwells among us in John 1:14. Finally, the people of God are in the temple, or are the temple in 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20. A second point here is that God's sovereignty helps us to understand the relationship between God and humans. He is in control and we are not, and he is worthy of following and obeying. Most of the time, we don't know what God is doing in our life, but we can look back later and understand a lesson that we might have learned or a way that God grew us in some way. And the same is true in the Bible. The Israelites must have wondered what God was doing when he led them out of Egypt. They were out there for 40 years wandering. They must have questioned God at that point, thinking that he had abandoned them. That would be really tough. They were certainly unable to see the purpose at that time. But what's really cool is in Deuteronomy 8:2, we learn that what God was actually doing. So it says, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble you and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands." So now we understand what God was doing. He was kind of testing them to see if they would give up on God or if they were going to be faithful to him. Abraham must have wondered how God would give him children in his old age when God came to him and promised him as many descendants as the stars. But God did give him children. Moses must have wondered how God would help him stand up to Pharaoh. But God did. He gave him all the signs to show to Pharaoh and all the things that happened to the Egyptians. These are just a few examples of people wondering why God was doing what he was doing and having just a little bit of faith in the process. But when we read the entirety of the Bible, it's clear that every single situation has a purpose. So God is worthy of obeying. He always is with us. He doesn't leave us, and he has purpose in his entire world. Especially when we look to the book of Revelation, the time to come, God tells us kind of his ultimate plan, which is not a part of the New Testament. So to be continued, right?